Hey guys, how you doing? Hope you having good day. In this video, I am gonna talk about my student Deku. What if Deku manifested Emerald Dragon's power? Part 1. And subscribe for more, also like this video, that will be awesome, helps me to stay motivated. And thanks to the author of this story, this video is possible. So do check it out and show some love. Name of this fanfic is Emerald Dragon by KingE, so do check out the author of this story and check out entire work. Also, if you have any complaints about videos, feel free to comment, I will try to improve them. Let's jump in video. Not all men were born equal. That was the lesson Izuku had learned ever since he could walk. The strong could do whatever they wished to the weak. This has been the reality of the world since living beings came into existence. And he had come to understand that this inequality still held true, even in the humblest school playgrounds or the neighborhoods where society's marginalized people resided. However, the situation was considerably more complex in the upper echelons of society. "Are those horns?" Hisashi Midoriya asked as he checked his son's head. Inko, who was holding a baby, ran her fingers over little Izuku's hair, noticing small horns growing out of either side of his head. "It looks like it, but that doesn't look like any of our quirks," she responded with uncertainty while her husband looked thoughtful. "The mutation type. Better be something useful once he's 4, Hisashi commented before turning his back on them and walking toward the door. Inko frowned at his comment but didn't voice her thoughts. "It was nice seeing you, but I've got a job to do. I'll see you tonight," he said before leaving, without even sparing a single glance in her direction. Thus, the hero known as Blazing Breath left. "I guess it's just you and me, little guy," Inko softly said as she gently poked her son, who grabbed her finger and held it between his 2 hands. "Wow, you sure are strong, aren't you?" She snickered in amusement before pulling her finger away. "Well, no reason to stay here alone. Why don't you and I visit Aunt Mitsuki and her little Kitsuki? I'm sure you two will become great friends once you grow up." It was a fleeting memory, something Izuku couldn't recall clearly due to his young age. Even now, he could assert that he had never really experienced having friends. Yet, it didn't bother him. He had never been heartbroken about it. From a very young age, he was aware of his innate strength, and this strength often attracted others to him. They approached him because they thought he had a cool quirk or because they believed he was popular. This pattern didn't surprise him, considering the very first confrontation he had once he discovered the second aspect of his mutation at the age of 4. It had been Kitsuki who had challenged him in the middle of the schoolyard. Even without utilizing his quirk, Izuku had won, as he always did due to his unnatural strength. Kitsuki was the closest thing he had to a friend, mainly because their mothers knew each other. Nevertheless, the blonde boy's challenges were predictable and irritating. Things could have remained that way. He could have just been an ordinary kid with a strong quirk and grown up using that power for his own benefit, living a comfortable and straightforward life. A life that involved combat, at the very least. His interests were few, but fighting was exhilarating, unlike typical hobbies. Regrettably, his father, whom he considered an idiot, had different intentions. "You could have seen it if you had been with me to the doctor," Inko crossed her arms in annoyance as Hisashi sighed and rolled his eyes. Meanwhile, Izuku was simply standing nearby. As a 4-year-old, he was taller, could walk, and even his horns had grown and pointed at the sky. "And I told you I didn't have the time," Hisashi replied with frustration. "What were you busy doing? Do you think I don't watch the news? I know you haven't arrested anyone, so if it isn't hero work, what were you doing?" Inko demanded an answer while tapping her foot. "Something that'll get us rich someday. Now shut up. I want to see my son's quirk." Hisashi snapped, making Inko huff and look away. "Go on, Izuku. Show your daddy what you can do." "Alright," Izuku responded simply, without any desire to argue with either his father or mother. Displaying his quirk wasn't a complicated task. His body gradually transformed, with his nose and neck lengthening as his spine expanded. His hands and feet morphed into claws while his clothes vanished, leaving his skin adorned with green scales. He assumed the form of a serpentine eastern dragon, somewhat larger than his human form. "Haha. A dragon. It really is a dragon. Inko. Look at him." Hisashi exclaimed as he picked up Izuku in his draconic form. The boy didn't say much and simply wrapped around his father's neck instead. "He'll probably grow bigger when he's older. With a quirk like that, he can become one of the greatest heroes in the world." "What if he doesn't want to be a hero?" Inko questioned. Izuku had to admit that he had never been a fan of heroes. However, the job did seem exciting, something he wouldn't mind pursuing. Yet, as a smart young man, he realized that being a hero also meant bearing numerous responsibilities, which, to be honest, sounded quite bothersome. He preferred the idea of simply combating villains without getting bogged down in all the other aspects. And why wouldn't he want to be one? It's the most privileged profession out there. And he has enough potential to be at the top. He could be rich. Hisashi argued as Izuku slid off his neck and turned back into a human. Even before he had this quirk, he was strong for a boy his age. He could already lift a table a year ago. I don't want to argue about this, Hisashi, Inko sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. He'll decide what he wants to do. I don't mind being a hero, Izuku interjected, bringing their attention back to him. Attaboy. I knew I could count on you. Hisashi slapped the boy's back with pride. Can you fly too? I didn't see any wings. Not by usual means, Inko cut him off as her husband turned to look at her with a puzzled expression. He can create some kinds of clouds which can make things float. The doctor suggested he use them on himself to fly, and it worked, she explained as Hisashi nodded along. These could be useful, too, Hisashi remarked. Alright, it's decided. You're coming with me so you can see how a hero works. Could use some training, too, he grinned. Are you insane? Hisashi, he's a child. Inko stepped between the two of them. Mom, Izuku muttered impassively. He didn't mind seeing his father at work personally. Look, you will probably understand later, but training him now will be important for us, Hisashi grumbled, visibly fed up with the woman's words. Then, make me understand. What are you hiding? Inko questioned as Hisashi's eyes traveled from her to Izuku back and forth. Alright, he sighed. Let's just say the Heroes Public Safety Commission, in certain cases, recruit children and train them to be their own personal lapdogs for secret missions. Think of them as a part of a secret agency like the CIA in America, he revealed as Izuku looked curious. How do you know about this? Inko arched an eyebrow worriedly. Because I have contacts. Which is far more useful than your useless job at the hospital, Hisashi scoffed. My contact told me that their current people silencer, let's call it that, could potentially be compromised. They've shown doubts about their duties. It's our greatest opportunity yet. If Izuku shows enough potential, we could well give him to them. They'll mold him into a perfect asset and we'll be the ones they'll reward, he explained as if his son wasn't even in the room, making Inko gasp. Our son? You want to give them our own son? Is money that more important to you than family? Inko shouted as she grabbed his shoulders and shook him in anger. Not so loud. Do you know what could happen to us if the HPSC learns we know about this? Hisashi hissed as he grabbed one of Inko's hands, only for the green-haired woman to slap him with it other. Then I'll tell them everything myself. I won't let you destroy this family. She warned him, meeting Hisashi's glare with her own. Unfortunately, she suddenly dropped to her knees as a fist connected with her belly, making her spit out saliva. Izuku widened his eyes in surprise. Don't you slap me, dumb broad. I'm trying to give this family some prestige. He responded while his wife was holding her stomach in pain. He sighed, running his hand across his forehead. Come on, I didn't punch you that hard. Please just forget about whatever you heard, Hisashi, Inko pleaded with tearful eyes. As if. I know my son, he's just like me, and I think he knows the opportunity this is, right, Izuku? Hisashi asked the green-haired boy with a grin. Izuku gazed at him without responding, leaving Hisashi to assume his silence as agreement. However, his son was merely processing his father's words. Did he want to trade him for money? Did he intend to sell him? To be exploited as a mere weapon? These notions were unfathomable for a child. He had always been taught that parents were meant to protect their own. Every praise from his father felt empty following that revelation. Each time he commended Izuku for his extraordinary strength during training, it served as a reminder that it was all to facilitate his sale to the HPSC, an organization he hadn't even known existed prior to his research on the internet. His father's explanations had raised many questions in his mind. Heroes were supposed to combat villains, weren't they? So, why were assassins employed by this agency? He didn't want to know. He didn't want to be a bargaining chip. True to his father's word, Izuku accompanied him whenever he wasn't at school to observe and learn the ways of heroes. He also received training. Initially, he held his father in high regard, believing that strength was a key requirement for being a hero. However, he soon discovered the harsh reality. Blazing breath. Hisashi shouted as he breathed a stream of fire out of his mouth and blasted a pair of villains away. Both of them dropped to the ground with scorch marks all over their bodies and burned clothes. One of them, still barely conscious, tried to crawl away from the hero who was closely followed by his son. Damn it, what was that guy? The villain began stammering, only to collapse before he could finish his sentence. Thank you so much. A woman ran up to Hisashi and bowed her head as the hero smirked. Izuku observed from a distance as his father effortlessly dealt with two unarmed muggers. This was a recurring pattern. Whenever Hisashi took him along, they seemed to only confront small-time criminals. The more he thought about it, the more it became apparent to him that his father exclusively pursued easy targets. His dad's actions began to make sense as he realized that his father wasn't among the top 100 heroes. Hisashi only used his powers against the most vulnerable, and Izuku failed to see the merit in that approach. Inko's futile attempts to prevent Hisashi from taking Izuku along with him often ended with him snapping, yelling, or resorting to even worse actions, such as hitting her. Even at the tender age of 4, Izuku believed that he possessed the strength to incapacitate his father with a surprise blow to the head. However, his experiences outside had taught him a harsh lesson: the weak had no choice but to curse the strong as they were crushed beneath their overwhelming power. Even when he witnessed Katsuki bullying someone, he chose not to intervene, as he believed that helping the weak when he himself was strong enough to stay out of trouble was pointless. The real problem was that he, too, found himself beneath his father's control. And once Hisashi was done, the HPSC would be next in line if his father's plan succeeded. This was something he vehemently refused to accept. He had no desire to be a disposable tool, neither for the HPSC nor his own father. He held a deep-seated resentment for them both, and he couldn't be the only one who felt that way. His father's lessons didn't end there. He was also instructed in various illicit activities, from extorting money from small businesses by offering protection to blackmailing individuals in exchange for financial gain. According to his father, these skills would serve him well in the future, making it easier to manipulate people and gather information. While it was true that many of these people could potentially overpower Hisashi, he explained that his status as a hero granted him a more dangerous leverage. As a hero, he could act with relative impunity, and this allowed men like him to operate freely, only yielding to an even higher authority when necessary. "We've wasted enough time. I'll call my contact and see what I should do," Hisashi while going through his phone. "Hisashi, please," Inko begged as her husband paced around the room. "He's ready. The HPSC will give him far better training," Hisashi commented, dialing someone as he put the phone to his ear. "Come on, pick up," he grumbled in annoyance while tapping his foot. He didn't even wait 10 seconds before growing annoyed that his contact wasn't picking up the phone. 2 years had elapsed since Izuku first manifested his quirk, and he had undergone a growth spurt, now standing tall enough to reach Hisashi's waist. Despite his father's somewhat inadequate training methods, which essentially consisted of battling him until Izuku grew exhausted or was knocked out, the boy had made remarkable progress. Notably, Hisashi refrained from using his own quirk during their sparring sessions. Surprisingly, it was his father who consistently ended up fatigued after these encounters. The same principle held when it came to weapons training. Given the incredible strength Izuku possessed, his father suggested he train with a heavy weapon. However, Izuku had yet to make a decision regarding which weapon he would prefer to use. It seemed the day for his father to sell him away finally came. He waited a long time for this. Hisashi spent years praising his unrivaled strength, so it was time to prove him right. If he wanted to be free, he needed to get rid of him. He would figure out the rest later. Izuku clenched his fist, waiting for the opportunity to strike. "Hisashi!" Inko shouted as she grabbed the phone from her husband's hand, making him widen his eyes in anger. "Give it back. I've got no time for your bullshit," Hisashi shouted as he stretched out his arm to take back the cell phone, only for Inko to push him away. "We could literally get a good position in the HPSC for giving them this gold mine. The perfect hero project." He pointed at their son. "How many times do I have to explain this? No. It's over. I'm not listening to you anymore. And I'm not letting you hurt me or my son anymore. I'm leaving," Inko glared before smashing his phone on the floor, making Hisashi widen his eyes. "Come on, Izuku. Let's get out," she instructed before turning her back to the man. She didn't even bother going to pack her things, likely wanting to leave as soon as possible. "Leave? No one here is leaving, Inko. Not until I say so," Hisashi clenched his teeth, only for the green-haired woman to ignore him. Meanwhile, Izuku looked at the table and narrowed his eyes. "I told you that no one is leaving," he yelled before breathing out a thin line of fire just as Izuku broke off one of the legs of the table. The fire traveled fast, and Inko didn't even notice it until it was too late. Until soaring pain filled her whole body and made her collapse to the floor. It was only when she saw her injury that she fully registered the pain. Hisashi's fire breath had sliced through her left leg until everything below the knee was separated from her body. "Ah!" She screamed in pain as she grabbed her stump, tears rolling down her eyes. If the fire hadn't cauterized her injury, she would have been bleeding to death right now. However, she couldn't really see the positive in her current situation. "This wouldn't have happened if you had listened," Hisashi shouted with clenched fists before turning his gaze to her cut-off leg, lying a couple of meters away. "Shit, damn it. You think I wanted this? Look at what you made me do," he yelled as he walked toward her. "Stop," someone ordered, making the older man pause and look at the origin of the voice. It was Izuku. And he was holding the leg of a table as if it were a bat. "Your fight is with me, old man," he shouted. "What the hell are you doing?" Hisashi arched an eyebrow. "Protecting your dumb mother? I thought you understood the opportunity I'm giving you, Izuku." She wants to keep it from you. He motioned at the other woman, who was still clutching her leg. No, Izuku replied. I just want to beat you until you can't move. You're getting annoying, old man, he grinned excitedly. Maybe instead of teaching you to fight, I should have taught you to respect your father first, Hisashi grumbled with clenched fists. I guess I'll start now, he added with some coming out of his nostrils. This simple act reminded Izuku of their time spent together, mostly watching fights or training. Every time Hisashi would get mad at losing their little sparring and would fight more aggressively in an attempt to beat his son to an inch of his life to assert his superiority only to fail. Any kid would have seen only a monster instead of a father in those times. Yet, the green-haired boy smiled smugly. Bring it on. I've never been scared of you even once. Izuku exclaimed, ready to jump at his father. However, before any one of them could make a move, blood suddenly gushed out of either side of Hisashi's head. The man's eyes rolled in the back of his head as he collapsed to the floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. At the same time, the window's glass reached the floor too. The man hadn't even seen his own death coming as his life faded away nearly instantly. Inko suddenly stopped her screaming, the sight of her husband's death overshadowed the pain in her leg. Izuku, on the other hand, widened his eyes and turned his gaze toward the window. With his draconic eyes, as precise and as good as an eagle's, he caught sight of a shadow standing on top of a rooftop a couple of hundred meters away. The figure was unrecognizable, but he did see them with what looked like a sniper rifle, now pointing at the sky as the somewhat feminine figure stood at the edge of the roof. The shadow didn't stay much longer and calmly walked away. Someone had just assassinated Hisashi Midoriya in his own house and he didn't even see it coming. And Izuku had an idea of who ordered his death. Oh god. Izuku. Take the phone and call the police, Izuku. Inko instructed the young boy, who turned his look on her, showing her cold eyes. The gaze would have sent a shiver up her spine if it weren't for the situation she was in and the fact that this was her son. The green-haired boy dropped his makeshift weapon before walking to the nearest phone. Maybe he didn't have to leave yet, after all. Not yet. He was ready to fight his father and he would fight anything that would get in his way. 8 years later. Bakugo Kitsuki lazily sat in his chair, leaning back with his feet on the table, totally uncaring of the teacher who was currently talking. His classmates, damn extras, were just as bored as he was. It was no secret no one liked school in general, and Aldera was even worse than normal school. It had no prestige at all. Which was why Kitsuki was glad to be there. Because he would be the only one in this pathetic school to enter UA. Honestly, he was also probably the only one who would even become a hero here, since they were all extras who thought they were better than they actually were. Even his friends who were more lackeys had no value in his eyes. He didn't hate them or anything, he simply didn't think they would ever become heroes. Maybe they could become his sidekicks if they begged him for it. However, he was fully aware that his ambitions were unattainable. Not because he didn't think he would become a hero or pass UA's entrance exam. Because he was sure he wouldn't be the only one in the school to succeed. And that made his blood boil. At least, this wasn't an extra, but someone who could actually oppose him. Now for your orientations usually, I would hand out aptitude tests, but the teacher grinned as he showed a stack of paper in his hand, then threw it up in the air. You all want to go for the hero track, don't you? He laughed as all the students, except for Kitsuki, showed off their quirks eagerly. Yes, you all have wonderful quirks. But there are many hero schools out there, and you must decide which one would suit you best. Now I have your wishes here, but he began as his eyes traveled around the classroom. Does anyone know where Midoriya is? He asked, only for a random student to raise his hand. Midoriya-san is late, but he should be here, soon, sensei. Stated the student as most classmates looked nervous. Kitsuki wasn't the only one who had lackeys in this classroom. Midoriya did, too. And if Fingers wasn't a childhood friend, he would have bailed on Kitsuki a long time ago to kiss Midoriya's ass instead. Just as the teacher was about to say something, the classroom door was opened, pulling everyone's attention to it. Did someone say my name? A masculine voice asked. The person who entered was the exact boy they were talking about, someone who would be impossible to miss in a classroom. Midoriya Izuku easily towered over any adult man with a height of a little under 300 centimeters. His long and wild green hair reached the middle of his back, while his horns also grew accordingly to fit his new size. He was slim, but very muscular, which could be seen because of his unbuttoned school uniform. The boy had a handsome face, and although he still looked fairly young, you wouldn't think he was a 14-year-old boy. Ah, Midoriya-san. Yes, I was just asking your comrades about you. I was wondering where you were, the teacher explained eagerly. The boy, on the other hand, breathed out in boredom. Yeah, I didn't bother being on time once I saw it was your boring class, teach, Izuku responded as he walked to the back of the class and sat at his desk, which had a chair appropriate to his size. Of course. There is no problem, Midoriya-san. If it depended on me, you would have already graduated. The teacher praised the green-haired boy. Kitsuki scoffed. The teachers kissed his ass too, thanks to his powerful quirk and good grades. The blonde wouldn't deny that he received a similar treatment since teachers went as far as ignoring his bullying of other students. But that was in the past. You came here just in time, Midoriya-san. We were talking about your classmates' future projects. I noticed that you and Bakugo wished to try out for UA. The reaction was almost instant. What? UA? They only have a 2% acceptance rate. This shouldn't be a surprise coming from Bakugo and Midoriya-san. If anyone can do it, it's them. Shut up, you rejects. I don't need your praises. Bakugo shouted in annoyance, putting a stop to all the students' shouts. Hey. Who are you calling rejects? One of the students growled in anger before various others voiced similar complaints. Shut the hell up, already. I've got no interest in you, extras. Bakugo barked in an attempt to silence them, then turned his gaze on the tall green-haired boy. And don't think I forgot you, Scales. Just because you're better than these weaklings doesn't mean you're any better than me. He shouted at Izuku, who simply narrowed his eyes. Their eyes meeting was enough to shut everyone else up since no one even dared to break the thick tension in the classroom. Oh? Remind me how your last challenge against me went again. Izuku asked, making Bakugo clench his fists in anger. That was just pure luck. I couldn't even use my full strength. He retorted. True, he couldn't since they were on the school grounds and quirk use was already heavily restricted, so you could imagine how much more it would be in school. However. And I didn't even need to use my quirk. I have no time to waste on you anymore, so don't get in my way, Izuku lazily replied while yawning, adding even more fuel to Bakugo's fire. Damn it, stop thinking you're above me. Don't come crying once I get first place in the UA entrance exam. As if that would happen, runt. Izuku glared before standing up, making everyone in the room flinch in fear. That was one other thing that pissed Kitsuki off. They weren't reacting like that when he got mad. They weren't even afraid of confronting him most of the time. Extras like them should respect him. Who are you calling a runt? Kitsuki snapped back with sparks exploding in his palms. At least, he had the balls to argue against the green-haired boy, unlike these other weaklings. Now, boys, please. No fighting in class, the teacher tried to ease the tension while the two students continued their stare down. BFFT, what a joke, Izuku chuckled while shaking his head. You lost. Get over it. If you want to challenge me again, then I'll wait for you at the top. You think you'll be at the top before me? Kitsuki growled, only for the green-haired boy to look at him with exasperation and pity. You idiot, I already am, Izuku scoffed. There was no teenager as strong as he was, and probably not many adults either. You could call it arrogance, but he knew better than anyone his own power. You fucking Kitsuki started, only for Izuku to begin walking away to everyone's surprise. Today's class is even more boring than I thought, teach, so I'm leaving. Don't forget to write down I attended class, Izuku declared before walking out of the room without a care in the world. Oh of course, Midoriya-san, the teacher nodded. Bakugo clicked his tongue but did not go after him. It didn't matter, after all. In 10 months, he would show him. Izuku calmly walked down the streets as he thought back to what happened in class. Indeed, he was going to enter UA and become a hero. He wasn't doing this as some kind of honor to his father or anything like that. Oh, no, he didn't care about the man at all. He even would have killed him, himself if it weren't for that assassin. In fact, he was about to do something far different from what his father would have wanted. Becoming a hero would only make that easier and more fun, since it was a life full of danger, which was something he desperately sought recently. The fights he witnessed when watching his father may not have been impressive, but they looked entertaining, especially for the villains who fought like their lives were on the line. Unfortunately, he never got anything as good as those. After his father's passing, he went from dojo to dojo, from combat sport to combat sport, not only to train, but also to get a similar feeling. Quirks were forbidden, of course. However, even without his quirk, they were no match for him. If there weren't so many restrictions, weak men like his father would have never succeeded as much as they did in life, and Izuku also could have lived as he wished. The world's greatest hero, huh? Izuku smirked with arrogance. I need much more than something so trivial. 4 years ago. The 10-year-old, and much smaller, Izuku stood before a door, staring at it with confidence. There was one thing he wondered about for a long time. Why did the biggest kid rule the schoolyard? Why did the toughest prisoner control the prison? Why did the more dangerous villains earn respect and dominion over other villains? Because everyone was afraid of them, of course. Was there anything better than fear to manipulate someone? No, what he didn't understand was why this wasn't applied to the real world, the world where normal people lived. All Might was the strongest hero in Japan, probably even the world. His name alone put fear into villains' hearts. Mostly into weaklings' hearts. However, it wasn't like he changed the world much, was it? Ultimately, men like his father could get whatever they wanted thanks to their status only. He was too ambitious for his own good, and when he was too much of a bother for the higher ranks, he was killed like an insect. Izuku wasn't mad about it, he never really loved him, after all. He was more mad about the consequences Hisashi's death brought to him and his mother. Their main source of income was Hisashi, which they lost after he was assassinated. Moreover, Inko was forced to quit her job at the hospital because of the injury she suffered. Losing half a leg prevented her from being a nurse any longer. They had to move out and live in a dump. An apartment that wasn't even half as spacious as their house had been. The social benefits they got from the government were barely enough to pay their bills. Not only was he almost made a tool for the government, but they also fucked him over after murdering his stupid father. The worst part was that the ones responsible were likely bastards in suits who didn't even know Izuku and his mother's names, but still gave out the orders to get rid of Hisashi. They didn't do it because they thought what he was doing was morally wrong, and neither did Izuku, since he was simply baffled how someone who could barely win against his 5-year-old son in a spar would be able to intimidate anyone. No, they removed him from the equation because he became a pain in their ass. Then they dared spout nonsense about fighting for the greater good and the people. What a load of bullshit. To Izuku, he saw nearly no difference between villains and them. Nevertheless, his father had the right idea, somewhat. He needed to be stronger. If he wanted to make any change in the world, this would be necessary. The door he was staring at was the entrance of a dojo he found recently. He wanted to test his strength and the progress he made here. It was a regular habit of this. His usual approach was to go in and challenge the best fighter directly. It helped that many of the facilities teaching combat didn't allow mutants. Clearly, their ego couldn't accept that some people would just be born stronger than them. Since quirks couldn't be used, mutants would have a natural advantage. This is highly unusual. Where are your parents? A man wearing a judogi and a black belt asked. Meanwhile, several other people with similar attire but different belts threw glances at the boy and the judoka. My mom's home. I want to fight the best here, Izuku stated fearlessly. Yes, I heard you the first time, but we can't really let anyone challenge our students. Especially not a child, however, we can call your parents and I'm sure they'll be happy to enroll you here. Then you'll get to challenge whoever you want, the judoka responded, only for Izuku to shake his head. No. I want to challenge now. And if I lose, then I'll enroll, okay? The boy confidently retorted. This must be a joke, the judoka grumbled under his breath while holding the bridge of his nose. Wait a second, it's not like the kid is doing anything wrong, let's give him what he wants and send him on his way, someone suddenly interrupted. Hirota. Are you sure? The adult Izuku was talking to turned around to address another man, another judoka with a black belt. He also seemed a bit burlier than the first one. Of course. I never back out of a challenge anyway, Hirota assured, much to everyone's surprise. You're the best here? Izuku asked with a raised eyebrow. Yup. Show me what you got, he replied, pointing at the tatami behind him. Izuku simply nodded before walking up to it. It shocked people even more since they expected he would like to get ready mentally at least. Hirota simply snickered internally. He recognized the flames of youth and the need to have a challenge. He was the same when he was a child, but that changed as he grew up. The trials he went through and the losses he suffered built him into who he was now. He learned humility by finding people better than him and surpassing them. This dojo had played a huge part in it and he hoped it would do the same to this youngster. Naturally, he didn't plan on seriously hurting him or anything. This was judo, after all. Sweeping him off his feet and lightly grappling him should be enough. He would just need to make sure those horns don't hurt him while doing so. Soon enough, they stood across each other and Hirota easily towered over the child. It was a comical sight since a black belt of his caliber rarely had to face a kid, even when it was to teach them. Hajime. The first judoka announced loudly. Immediately, Hirota stretched his arm toward the boy, ready to grapple him. Before he could even react or register what happened, he was swept off his legs and collapsed to his side. Widening his eyes, Hirota's mind buzzed with confusion, unable to understand what just happened. Somehow, the kid made him fall. Quickly, he bent his arms to raise himself up and stand back up, only for the young boy to grab his wrist and easily lift him up and throw him against the wall on the other end of the room. Hirota. The referee exclaimed in shock and worry when the other man fell on the floor after hitting the wall. What would happen? Hirota muttered to himself before staring at the boy in astonishment. I weigh 90 kilograms. How did he? Was it a strength quirk? It must have been. He cheated. There was no other way Hirota would have lost to a kid. That was disappointing, Izuku mumbled with a sigh. This dojo isn't interesting anymore, he added before walking toward the exit and no one dared to call out to him. Hirota. You okay? The referee ran up to him to help him on his feet. "Hey, that kid, did he say his name?" Haruta inquired while staring at the exit door. "No, why?" the other man answered. "Oh," Haruta simply mumbled. He never saw the child again. Present day. Izuku walked away from school with his hands in his pocket, uncaring of the world around him. He had never been worried about his education since he always passed his tests. Studying in a classroom was useless when he could do it on his own, and he proved it multiple times. His mother always said he inherited his analytical mind from his grandfather, but Izuku doubted that. It developed because he often studied heroes and villains fighting. There was always a fight broadcasted on television, and sometimes he was there on site. Learning to fight from watching other people, or even learning how their quirks worked, was more useful than anything. It would also prepare him for when he would enter UA. For now, he would do something a bit more useful than sitting in a classroom. Something interesting he discovered while walking around the more trashy territories of the city. While power alone could rule the underworld, money would always help. It would especially help when it came to his civilian life. After taking the train, Izuku found himself in the Gashik district. There were only a few people outside, which was great for someone like him who wouldn't want to get the attention of unwanted onlookers. This neighborhood was especially great because nearly everything here looked suspicious, so nothing would ever seem out of place. Not even the coffee shop with closed curtains. Izuku knocked on the door with as little strength as he could muster. He was tired of breaking doors by accident. "We're closed," someone replied from behind the door, making Izuku roll his eyes. That meant he was supposed to say the password and he would be let in, but he grew annoyed after some time. "For fuck's sake. You know who I am. There aren't many 3-meter-tall men here," he shouted. As expected, the person behind the door quickly opened it, grumbling under their breath along the way. "Hey, just get in," the doorman grumbled in annoyance. Izuku scoffed and lowered his head so he could get inside. The inside looked nothing like a coffee shop. In fact, it was nothing but stairs going down. He was used to walking down this path and it didn't make his blood pump as much as it did the first time, unfortunately. As the other man closed the door behind him, the sound of people chattering and cheering reached Izuku's ears. The lower he was descending, the louder the sound was getting. It was a sound he had grown quite used to lately. As he finally took the final step, he was able to lay his eyes on a large stadium filled with a couple hundred people, which was the best an underground fight club could ask for. There were several rows of seats and at the very bottom and center of the room was a massive ring with a cage around it. The spectators surrounding the ring seemingly cheered for two people inside, but neither of them seemed impressive. "Midoriya-san. So glad to see ya," someone suddenly exclaimed as soon as he stepped inside. It was a man, well, a male, because the person who just talked didn't exactly look human. His skin was green and scaly, while his head resembled an iguana with his tongue hanging out of his mouth. He was also wearing a black suit with a white shirt and a black tie. He likely got that nice expensive-looking suit thanks to Izuku. "I was waiting for ya. Manager," Izuku greeted him as the man snickered, putting a hand on Izuku's lower back, which was the highest he could reach. Now, come on, kiddo. You can call me Taki. We're good friends by now," Taki assured him while giving him back pats. Taki, the iguana man, was the one who introduced him to this place. Not of his own free will, of course. Izuku had been looking for information on the underworld with the internet at first, and when he had enough, he decided to search for it on the field. The green-skinned man had become quite cooperative after Izuku beat him to an inch of his life for trying to rob him. "Anyone interesting today?" Izuku asked, completely ignoring Taki's request, and walked down the stadium stairs toward the fighters' lounge. "We've got some fresh meat you'd probably find amusing," Taki responded while following after him. As the two walked away, one of the spectators couldn't help but overhear their conversation and narrow his eyes in confusion as he noticed something strange. "Hey, isn't that a middle schooler's clothes?" he asked the man sitting on his right. Indeed, even if they were huge and the open jacket made Izuku look like a delinquent, it still resembled a middle schooler's outfit. "That's because it is, kid's apparently 14, the second man replied, grinning in amusement at his friend's shock. "What? He looks like a grown-ass man. And not just because of his size. What's a kid doing here? He's a fighter in the ring. He's pretty good, too. I win every time I bet on him, but I've got no idea what his quirk is." "We call him Oni," he retorted, and it was easy to figure out where the name came from when looking at the boy's horns. The first man still doubted this was a place for a kid like him, though. Down in the fighter's locker room, Izuku sat on a bench, rubbing the bridge of his nose in annoyance. His manager, Taki, stood before him, his hands in his pockets. "That's not the guy I wanted to fight. Did Puro refuse to let me fight the champion?" Izuku questioned as Taki sighed. "I didn't even ask him. Fighting Ryo is way too early for you," Izuku's manager responded irritatedly. "What? "I thought I told you I wanted to fight the champion," Izuku shouted before suddenly standing up and grabbing Taki by the collar, lifting him in the air while the iguana man gasped. "Why, you must understand, Midoriya-san. This is the champion we're talking about. You're still a newbie. You only got a dozen fights under your belt. We should take it slow, this guy's too strong for you for now," Taki stammered fearfully, making the boy scoff. "Too strong? That's exactly why I want to fight him, idiot. Talk to Ryo and tell him I want to fight the champion and no one else. Going against weaklings is getting boring," Izuku ordered as he dropped the man on the floor. Alright. Taki retorted before springing to his feet and scurrying out of the room. "That stupid kid will be the death of us. What does he plan on doing against Ryo, for fuck's sake?" He grumbled under his breath and fixed his tie. Izuku breathed out before sitting down again and leaning back. He already knew the Fight Club's manager would accept. After all, as Taki said, the middle schooler was a newbie. However, he was a promising one. It would be an entertaining matchup for the spectators, who would still most likely bet on the champion rather than the boy. The green-haired boy didn't care about the spectacle for the customers or about being the underdog. What he wished for was to be entertained, and he could only hope the champion would give him that. It seemed he got the first part of his wish, at least. "Now, ladies and dirty crooks. Welcome to Pierrot's Fight Club for a thrilling and unexpected match. Today, I am delighted to announce that our dear champion Mad Ryo will fight against the new fresh meat. The middle schooler with 13 consecutive wins, Oni." The announcer declared excitedly and loudly through the room's speakers. Almost immediately after his announcement, the crowd burst into cheers and whistles, many of them shouting Ryo's name and some of them screaming Izuku's pseudonym. "Bet now and win big, you only have 10 minutes before the match starts." Unsurprisingly, most of the crowd jumped off their seats and rushed to the betting desk while Taki watched fearfully. "There, you got what you wished for," he yelled while pointing at the ring. "You can't back out anymore," he added, only for Izuku to huff in boredom. "You're starting to annoy me," the younger man breathed out, glaring with only one eye at the lizard man, who stepped back with a shiver. "Whatever. This is probably gonna be our last fight, so consider this the end of our deal," he shook his head before walking toward the ring. "Of course, it is Dumbus is going to die," the scaly man groaned. Since this was an underground fight club, people died every day. Their bodies were disposed of in dumps and their names were forgotten. Izuku had potential. The two of them could have made it big. But his stupidity would cost him his life. And here when that kid found him that day, he thought his lucky star was finally shining on him. Nevertheless, he still earned quite a lot thanks to him and his previous fights. Even if they lose, he would still earn something by betting against Izuku. It was good knowing him, but in the end, money mattered much more. With everything he got from these fights, maybe Taki could find another promising fighter and become their manager. That one could even be more obedient as well. Certainly not a pain in the ass like Oni. Make some noise for Oni. A boy, a massive one for sure, but a boy who remained undefeated in the ring. Could he be the one to dethrone the one and only champion? He asked the cheering spectators as Izuku entered the ring. And on the other side the champion who defended his title for over 100 matches. The one and only Mad Ryo. Will he finally find someone tough enough to take his punches? He declared when the crowd chanted Ryo's name while he entered the ring. This wasn't the first time Izuku had seen this. Every time the champion fought, people would chant his name. He was easily the most popular fighter after all and the one who survived the longest here. Ever since he had seen him fight, Izuku had wanted to test his strength against him. Ryo would usually just finish a match with a few punches, but he loved building up the tension, so he always prolonged the fights. When the one who was called a madman finally climbed on the ring, the green-haired boy was finally able to take a good look at him. He was far from being massive like Izuku was, but he was still pretty tall for an average non-mutant man, since his height reached the middle schooler's belly. His well-built body and scars showed off his history of battles and training, and his short black hair certainly wasn't enough to hide his bloodlusted eyes. Yes, that was likely why most opponents didn't survive against him. His thirst for blood was the reason fights didn't end until death. "You look pretty strong for a kid. This might be fun," Ryo whistled as he looked at Izuku from down to up. "But strength won't help you," he added arrogantly. "We'll see," the middle schooler responded confidently. "The fighters are in the ring. Lower the cage." The announcer ordered as a cage slowly descended from the ceiling to surround the ring. "The second the cage touches the ring, the match will start," he declared, notifying the fighters to be ready. Ryo got into a fighting stance, raising his fists as he stared into Izuku's eyes. Seeing someone not get intimidated by his size was a rare sight for the green-haired boy and it actually pumped him up a little. Izuku simply clenched his fists. Finally, the cage reached the ring. Ryo began excitedly, only for a fist to meet his face and interrupt him, throwing him against the cage, which he bounced off from. And Oni lands the first hit. The announcer declared with a shout as Izuku didn't give the champion any break and threw an array of punches all over Ryo's torso. He follows with multiple more punches, forcing the champion to back away. Damn it. He's actually gonna break my ribs. Ryo thought as Izuku's huge fist continued to relentlessly assault him, easily breaking his guard. However, that was fine. Even though the boy was stronger than he expected, this was still according to plan. This is starting to look like I'm fighting a punching bag, Izuku commented with boredom as he punched Ryo so hard in the abs that he threw him off the floor. The champion falls. For the first time, Mad Ryo's back falls to the ground. The announcer shouted while the champion punched the floor, slowly standing up again as he spat out blood. His face was swollen, and Izuku's fists even left red imprints all over his torso, but he could still stand. Suddenly, he flexed his muscles and slowly bulked up, making them grow larger with his fists and teeth clenched. There it is. The champion is using his quirk. The announcer stated as the crowd cheered. Meanwhile, Izuku simply stood a few meters away, staring at him with a stone-cold expression. The idiots, I've been using my quirk from the start, Ryo thought in amusement. His quirk, Absorb, granted him the ability to store any impacts he encountered during a fight within his body. His muscles would absorb the strength distributed by his adversaries, making each of his blows as potent as the combined power of the hits he endured. The sole drawback was that he had to endure those impacts initially, necessitating strengthening his body to withstand powerful hits. Nevertheless, this ability was entirely ineffective against ranged attacks, so any lowlife with a good ranged quirk would be an issue for him. However, in close combat situations like this Fight Club, it was an entirely different story. Here, he was unbeatable. His main strategy had always been to let his opponent hit him a few times, then counter-attack after having enough power. Everyone else thought he was just making the fights longer for fun. This kid had so much power that it would be his shortest fight yet. Now, this is getting interesting, Izuku muttered as Ryo rushed him with an impressive speed for a man with such bulky muscles. Take this. Ryo grinned as he delivered a blow, which the boy didn't even defend against, right in his belly. Unsurprisingly, this was enough to push Izuku back and even make him spit out blood. Sorry, but not good enough, kid. This is how you kill someone. He shouted as he launched a flurry of punches against Izuku's chest and abs. The feeling of his punches seemingly sinking inside his enemy's flesh was enough to bring a large smile to the champion's face. 50 consecutive Demon Rush. The champion's ultimate move. Will Oni be able to stand up again, the announcer asked as the horn boy fell on his back with a loud thump. No way. This was instant death. Ryo smirked, wiggling his bloody fingers. Usually, he didn't have to use his ultimate move to win a fight, but he didn't wish to take any risks with that giant brat. I forgot how pain feels, Izuku grumbled as he held his chest, standing back up with a grunt. Amazing. Oni manages to stand up again. What? What the hell? Ryo muttered with a drop of sweat rolling down his cheek. The middle schooler's hits nearly made Ryo spill his guts. 50 times the combined power of those punches should have killed that kid. I guess that's expected from my own hits, though, Izuku snickered while holding his head. Huh? Wait, how do you? Ryo stepped back in surprise. That's obvious for any idiots who watch you fight, the green-haired boy responded. It was true. He watched several of Ryo's fights, and every time the champion bulked up, it was after taking multiple hits from his opponents. Izuku figured it was because he possessed some kind of power stockpiling quirk. Doesn't matter. I'll finish this, now. Ryo gave him a toothy grin as he got ready to launch himself against the massive boy again. No need, you showed me all you had already. This was a disappointment, Izuku replied after a sigh as his skin began shifting, growing scales and turning green. Huh? The champion blinked in puzzlement. He had no time to react before something slashed a large cut across his chest, causing a substantial amount of blood to gush out. His muscles quickly deflated as if they were a pierced balloon, while Ryo collapsed on his face, his eyes blank. Meanwhile, the scales over Izuku's arms slowly turned back into his regular skin. The champion has fallen. Against all odds, Oni has defeated him in the blink of an eye. The announcer declared. Many cheered at the outcome, but Izuku wasn't surprised to hear that most of the crowd wasn't happy to have lost their bet. The boy ignored their boos, though. He didn't get what he wished for in the end. What the hell was that quirk? Taki muttered as the cage rose and a few people entered the ring to carry out Ryo. The lizard man gulped. No, it wasn't because he lost his bet, but because he was afraid of what the manager would say. They just beat the champion. It was Pierrot's golden goose. They would get killed for sure. No, he could still run, couldn't he? Yes. He talked to Midoriya and they would leave to make some money another way. they would get even richer. You, my boy, are going to be my golden goose. Piro, a bulky bald suit-wearing man, exclaimed with a cigar between his fingers. Huh? Really? Taki mumbled by Izuku's side. The two of them stood before the Fight Club's manager's desk, which was also guarded by two other men standing a meter away from Piro. The man had called them into his office and Taki had wanted to straight up run away. However, Izuku decided otherwise and dragged him all the way here. At least, they gave them enough time so the horned boy would wrap his injuries in bandages. Of course. Here's your money, you two, Piro responded as he gestured for the two men behind him to come, which they did, and placed two briefcases on the desk. This is only the start, but as the new champion, you'll earn at least twice as much as you did before, kid. He guaranteed while Taki slowly approached one of the briefcases and opened it. There's so much. He shouted with his tongue hanging out excitedly out of his mouth. There's at least 75 million yen in there. He exclaimed to the open briefcase, which was filled with bundles of 10,000 yen bills. And you're telling me this is just the start, we'll get filthy rich, Midoriya-san. Taki shouted excitedly as Piro laughed. I think the three of us will have quite a profitable relationship, he stated before puffing out smoke. Nah, sorry, but I'm not interested, Izuku suddenly interrupted, much to Taki's horror. What do you mean you're not interested? Taki snapped at him, only for the boy to not even glance in his direction. And I know why. Piro questioned, his excitement having swiftly faded away. I wanted to test my strength against someone worthy and I thought this champion would be the one. Unfortunately, I was just disappointed. Since no one is stronger here, I've no business in this place anymore, he explained. Indeed, money wasn't the only reason he decided to fight in the ring. He also did it to have fun and excitement, to fight someone who would get his heart pumping. It was also a good way to train himself for the future. He already had a few plans and he would be playing in both fields of the law, so he needed to be strong enough. Since he had been in real fights, he would also have an advantage over the other heroes in training. However, these weren't the only reasons. Truthfully, he also wanted to find people to recruit. They would either have to be strong or possess useful skills. He needed allies he could either fully trust or be sure he could use for his own benefit. You're lucky Ryo's alive, or else I wouldn't have any champion right now. If that's what you want, I won't stop you, Piro responded before taking a puff of his cigar. But don't you want to earn money? The FFT, I can find another way to do that. Don't worry, Izuku scoffed before taking his briefcase and turning his back on them. Hey. Wait a damn second. What about me? Taki shouted, making the boy pause. Huh? What about you? I told you already. This was my last fight and I'm putting an end to our deal. You were useful to me, but I don't need you anymore, he answered, ready to leave again, only for Taki to shout again. And you think I'll accept that shit we could be rich, you dumbass? Stay right here. Taki ordered as Izuku froze up and slowly turned around. Piro and his guard simply remained silent with sweat rolling down their faces. What did you just say? Izuku asked followed by a glare. You heard me. I've had enough of hearing your constant caprices, so I'm putting my foot down. We've got a good thing going on here and I ain't letting you screw it up. Taki argued before freezing up once he finally noticed the boy's intense glare. Who do you think you are? Ordering me around, you stupid bastard. Izuku screamed and followed with a palm thrust. Wait. Taki tried to plead while backing away, suddenly remembering the danger the younger boy represented, only to be hit by Izuku's palm instantly. What happened next could only be described as gruesome as the lizard man's head was blown to bits, spraying his blood and his brains all over the floor. Surprisingly, Piro remained impassive, not caring at all that someone had just been murdered in his office. The guards were a different matter as they grabbed their handguns and held them defensively, ready to shoot at the horned boy if he made any sudden moves toward them. Taki's death was nearly instant as even his still twitching body hadn't processed it yet. The fact that Izuku did this so easily was enough to make shivers run down their spine. I'll take his share, Izuku simply said as he grabbed Taki's briefcase, too. Outstandingly enough, there was no trace of blood on his palm. It was as if the impact was such that it projected all of Taki's life juice directly out of his skull before it even made contact with the boy's hand. Wait. Piro called out to him. Take this, he said as he handed Izuku a piece of paper. What's this? The horned boy asked after grabbing it. It looked like. It's a phone number. An information broker whose name's Jiren. He could probably help you make some money or for some other things if you ever need to, Piro responded. I see. Thanks, Izuku simply retorted before walking out of the office and closing the door behind him. Now alone with his guards, Piro let out a relieved breath. Why did you give him Jiren's number, sir? One of them asked. That kid's got potential. I can see it from a mile away. Besides, I'd rather get him out of my hair, he answered while wiping sweat with a handkerchief. Do you want us to clean that up? The second guard pointed at Taki's corpse, only for Piro to sigh. No, I like having corpses in my office, Piro stated calmly. Of course, I want you to clean it up, you dumbass. He snapped in annoyance, which was enough to wake them out of their stupor and make them carry out the body. Yes sir. They replied hurriedly in unison. That kid's really got some crazy strength, Piro muttered while leaning back on his chair. Maybe he should keep an eye out on the news to check if his name would ever come up. He couldn't deny it was a nice sum of money. With the lizard's share in addition to his, he just got 150 million yen in total. It was the highest amount of money he ever earned until now, so leaving that place was a waste of income. However, it would be an even bigger waste to stay there. Sure, he loved fighting and getting his heart pumping, but he wouldn't get any excitement by getting rid of weaklings. He also mainly wanted to find suitable recruits for what he planned to do. It wasn't something he would come across at that place. With the time spent there, he could safely say there would be no surprises for him at the fight club. When you wanted to change society, no, the whole world, you couldn't simply take weak bums under you. The cannon fodder came after finding your officers. He didn't even need to have people who thought like him, all he needed from them was to be strong and loyal. The phone number Piro had given him for that information broker was a good opportunity to find soldiers from the underworld. The second opportunity for recruitment would be UA. Anyone else would be foolish to think they could simply enter this school and convince any of the students to fight against the government, but Izuku was not anyone else. He knew the true nature of people, and he was certain there were no saints in this world. Not in hero schools, at least. Greed and corruption were everywhere. Everyone had something they would yield to what they considered evil. Besides, his future companion's origins wouldn't matter much, considering that heroes and villains would be a thing of the past once his plans would succeed. Brute force wouldn't work for everything. Fortunately, he also had a strong mind. He would find the weaknesses that would bring them over to his side if they had any potential, of course. Now that he thought about it, analyses could be a good way to earn some pocket money until he found something better. That information broker could probably use some of the analyses he had done on several pro heroes. He had quite a few of them stored in files on his computer at home. Speaking of home, it may be time to go back. The school day would end soon since he spent a few hours at the fight club, especially since it was far from his house. His mother likely knew he was skipping classes, honestly, but she didn't care much when he brought good grades home. Glancing around, he noticed he was currently on a large and busy street. There was nothing unusual, but he did see there was a pro hero nearby. It was a woman with a purple and white skin-tight bodysuit and a purple domino mask with horns. She was about the height of a regular teen, too. Obviously, he immediately recognized her. Mount Lady Right, I saw her debut this morning, he muttered to himself. He remembered that one of the reasons he was late was that he watched Kamui Woods and her fight against that villain. She was one of the heroes he thought of earlier when speaking of weaknesses. Greed and vanity were written all over her face this morning. If there were any students like her in UA, they would be his prime targets. It was a shame she was already a pro since someone with a juntification quirk would have been useful. The heroine was standing at a stand that was selling hot dogs. It seemed she was using her feminine charms to get a discount from what Izuku could see by her body language. Izuku scoffed. Maybe once he possessed more assets and resources, he would come to her with an offer. He hoped for her that she would accept when that happened. However, for now, he still had somewhere else to be. As the horned boy stepped on a manhole cover and slowly walked away, green sludge hesitantly slipped out. A pair of eyes peeked around with panic. Shit, there are a ton of people around. There's no way I can sneak away here. Why did that bastard have to chase me? The sludge complained with mumbles while still looking around. Maybe if I could find someone with a nice quirk, he grunted until his eyes finally settled on a large green-haired boy. Oh. That guy's huge. He's gotta have a strong quirk. All Might doesn't stand a chance, he sniggered before quickly slipping out of the manhole and dashing toward the boy. As if he had sensed the upcoming attack, Izuku dropped one of the briefcases and turned around, throwing his punch toward the living sludge. Sneak attacks don't work on me, he clicked his tongue in annoyance, only to see his arm penetrating the sludge without doing any damage. The horned boy widened his eyes in surprise as the sludge laughed, attracting the attention of everyone around them. I'm a liquid, you idiot. A punch isn't gonna do anything. Now let me borrow your body. He laughed before wrapping around the long-haired boy. A villain. One of the bystanders shouted, alerting the ones who remained unaware. Predictably, most civilians swiftly fled the scene while Izuku attempted to get the villain off of him. Unfortunately, as the sludge had said, he was liquid. Even his big hands weren't enough to pull the villain away since he immediately reformed and moved around his body. This is getting annoying. Izuku complained, dropping his other briefcase, which only increased his ire. Taking advantage of his open mouth, the sludge villain quickly went for it, trying to get his body inside his victim's. "Don't worry. I'm coming," Mount Lady assured confidently the moment she noticed the commotion. "Please make some room." She instructed the civilians around before growing in size until she was at least 20 meters tall. "2 villains in one day is gonna boost my ratings," she exclaimed happily. Of course, she was also worried about the civilian who was caught, but she couldn't deny the rating boost was a nice bonus. "Shit. Just my luck. Another pro hero. Just let me in so I can get rid of her," the sludge villain shouted while choking the massive boy. That was enough. Izuku had given him enough chances. He didn't want to use his quirk since he wanted to avoid having problems with the law right now. However, he wasn't about to let such a pathetic villain take his life, not that the sludge could anyway. He simply didn't want to waste his time with such annoyances. Heat began building up in his belly, slowly warming up his body, which the villain didn't notice at all. "Last breath." Izuku roared as he breathed a strong stream of fire in the air, burning all the sludge inside his mouth and surrounding his face. "Wah!" Mount Lady stepped back in surprise, startled as the beam narrowly missed her. The sludge villain, on the other hand, screamed in pain as a large part of his body was burned away. His reflex was immediately to let go of his hostage, who hadn't seemed done with him since the moment Izuku extinguished his fire. He threw a powerful fist into the villain's eye and made him howl in pain. His punch was strong enough to make the sludge villain burst into multiple pieces. "That'll teach you to attack me," Izuku cracked his neck. Since the villain wasn't reforming, he was either dead or unconscious, but the green-haired boy doubted he killed him. "Hey. I understand you were attacked, sir, but using a quirk without a license," his Mount Lady began reprimanding him while shrinking, only to realize what he was wearing. "You're a middle schooler?" she asked in shock while looking up. "Huh? Yeah, I am. What's the issue?" he inquired as he bent over to pick up one of the briefcases, then noticed the second one was a bit further away. "You look like a 30-year-old man. And firstly, you should button your jacket," Mount Lady pointed out before walking over to the second briefcase to help him get his stuff. "Secondly, you shouldn't use your quirk without a license, that's vigilantism. But I guess I can be a little lax considering the situation," she explained as she widened her eyes once faced with the case, which was slightly open because of the drop. She could clearly see there was quite an amount of money inside. "I was just defending myself," Izuku simply stated as he hurriedly grabbed the second briefcase before the pro hero could take another look. Mount Lady smirked as if she just hit the jackpot. The way the horned boy didn't seem to care about the rules, as if he could get away with anything, added to the sum of money he carried, painted a clear picture in her mind. He was a rich kid. At first, she was only going to let him go with a slap on the wrist and then take the villain into custody, but this changed things a bit. It looked like he had a strong quirk, too. "Be that as it may, I still have to take you with me and this villain to the nearest police station. They have to write a report on this," she explained, trying her hardest to lace her tone with authority. "I don't have time for this," Izuku scoffed before attempting to depart, only for the woman to stand in front of him. The sight was almost comical, of course, because you wouldn't think she would even try it with the size difference. "Oh, really? Are you busy going back to school? Because as far as I know, middle schoolers shouldn't be out for another hour, at least," she snidely remarked, swiftly getting on the boy's nerves. It was obvious by now that she wouldn't let him go this easily. Considering the change in her demeanor, he already had an idea why, and that was his fault for being reckless with the money. Obviously, he didn't consider fighting her, but he still replayed in his mind what he learned about her this morning. It took her about 2 seconds to grow to her full gigantic size. Moreover, from what he saw earlier, she was the same size as this morning, which meant she was either in full giant mode or her normal size, there was no in between. Getting her inside a building, even one with a high ceiling, would be enough to reduce her chances of victory nearly to zero, since she wouldn't have enough room to use her quirk. "Alright," Izuku sighed. He would rather avoid any further issues, so it was better to submit to her for now. "As I was saying, what you did was illegal. However, I think we can come up with an arrangement that would benefit both of us. Obviously, you probably don't want to go to the police station, otherwise, mommy would get mad," she snickered in a slightly mocking tone. She was clearly not taking him seriously because of his age, which completely overshadowed his huge size. "Just get on with it," he mumbled in annoyance. "I'd rather not have to make a longer report, too. So what about this? You can pay a fine now, and you won't be mentioned to the police. Does that work for you?" Mount Lady suggested with her arms crossed under her chest. Since it happened so fast, no one recorded Izuku's actions, so they would indeed be covered up completely if he paid her now. "I'm sure you wouldn't mind doing it for little old me," she added seductively, trying to use her charms. Of course, she was extorting him. That was predictable. It was something his old man would regularly do, too. Although in her case she was also trying to seduction against him, it wouldn't work. Not because he felt no attraction, but because his desire to crush her to death overpowered his lust. She was trying to take the money he earned himself. What did you expect? I would rather hurry home, so here, take this, and don't bother me anymore, he grumbled before taking a few bundles of bills and giving them to her. There were around 200,000 yen, which seemed to greatly please her as she greedily snatched them out of his hand. Oh, yeah, that'll definitely cover the fine. It could have been more if you hadn't used your quirk just once, so you should count yourself lucky, Mount Lady stated while counting the bills. Great, then I'll leave if this is over with, Izuku scoffed before trying to walk away, only for Mount Lady to step in front of him again. Wait a second. What now? The horned boy asked with growing impatience. What are your plans for the future? Do you want to be a hero? Your quirk is strong and flashy. Yeah, I'm planning to enter UA, Izuku revealed, seeing no point in hiding that fact. I knew it. You just got that heroic energy. The blonde exclaimed, which was a blatant lie in Izuku's opinion, since he could smell she had something else to gain here. The heroine walked over to a woman with a purse and asked for a pen and something to write on. If you ever need an internship or want to become someone's sidekick, call my agency, she winked as she handed him a small piece of paper. It recently opened, but it's probably going to be one of the best by the time you graduate, so you should bet carefully. As expected, it was a phone number. Huh. That was the second one he got today. Well, he would keep it just in case, it would be useful. After all, she wasn't completely wrong. She had a decent quirk and charms, so she would quickly gain popularity. Thanks, Izuku mumbled before walking away, leaving the blonde behind. He made sure to remember to make her pay for this one day. He's definitely got some potential, she commented to herself before rubbing the back of her neck with a wince. But geez, looking up for so long actually hurt my neck. Oh. You're the pro hero who made her debut today. Please sign me an autograph. Someone suddenly shouted as they approached, encouraging more people to swarm her. It took some time, but they ended up recognizing her eventually. Even heroes who just debuted would be signing autographs because some people hoped they would rise in rankings so that their signatures would be worth a lot. Me too, Mount Lady. Now, wait a minute. I still have a villain to take into custody, she raised her hands defensively. The only problem now was that she had no idea how to even take into custody a bunch of sludge. While she was busy with hero fans, a thin arm popped out of the manhole. The man whom it belonged to slowly pulled himself up, getting out of the sewers with heavy breaths. Those sewers are so hard to navigate, huff, it made me lose all the time I had for the day now, where is that villain? The man spoke to himself before looking around. He didn't need to look for long since the sludge wasn't far away. In fact, it was just here and here and here and here, it was a bit everywhere, actually. The hero must have defeated him already, he remarked as he finally noticed the heroine. He clicked his tongue and shook his head. I understand being swarmed by fans, but locking up the evildoer should be a top priority, he lectured as he took out 2 empty bottles from his pockets. Still, he was grateful another pro hero was on the scene. Who knows what would have happened if this guy hadn't been caught. He could have gotten a hostage. He didn't wish to have this on his conscience because he used up all his time. It didn't take much longer for Izuku to reach his home, which changed a lot over the years. After Hisashi's death, they were forced to move into a small apartment, which quickly became too tiny for someone like Izuku, who was only growing bigger and bigger. Thanks to his size, which was considered a handicap, they received several benefits, so they could have a larger home. Naturally, the horned boy also brought some money lately with his fights in the underground fight club. Thanks to these factors, they now had a modest house, with ceilings barely high enough for Izuku to stand inside. However, it was an acceptable abode for now. When he came in, his mother was in the kitchen, which was visible from the living room, cutting up vegetables with a kitchen knife. Is that you, Izuku? She called out to him without turning around. Yeah, he answered as he put his briefcases on the table, not even bothering to hide them. What are you doing? He asked as his mother put the cut vegetables in a bowl before coming to meet him. Preparing dinner for tonight, she responded, showing her face. The green-haired woman hadn't changed much during all these past years. She was tall and slim, looking like she regularly exercised to keep her shape. Her long hair was tied in a ponytail just as usual, and she wore a yellow cardigan with a green skirt. However, there were major differences. While her eyes held a joyful light when Izuku was born, now they seemed exhausted and on the brink of giving up. She was fired recently and had been overworking for years. The reason was the other major difference. Her leg. The leg she lost below the knee had been replaced by a prosthetic that was a bit primitive, but they couldn't afford anything better. Most of it was just a metallic stick with a foot on the end. Inko had no choice but to limp most of the time. So, how was school? she asked, only for Izuku to wave in dismissal. The same as every day," he replied before taking one of the briefcases and leaving the second on the table. "Here, take this. It's for you," he stated, then left before she could say another word. "Oh, thank you," she thanked him as she opened the case, looking at the money with an impassive expression. She didn't ask him about it. She never asked questions about what he did outside of home or school. It wasn't like Izuku threatened her or anything, she simply decided not to question him. She likely knew it was dirty money, but the horned boy didn't care. He was perfectly aware that she wouldn't betray him or call the police on him. The reason why she wouldn't betray him was unknown even to him, but he supposed it was because he was her son. It was that simple. When he finally reached his room, he came in and locked the door behind him. His bed took up most of the space, but the room itself was already big enough so two siblings would be able to live in it together. There were barely any wall decorations except for an All Might poster and two other ones for a rock band called Black Stones. On the shelves on his walls, there was an All Might figurine, an Endeavor, and a Maruko one. Between all of them also stood a dragon. There was also a katana on a stand across his bed. Izuku threw the briefcase on the bed before sitting at his desk, where his computer was. He didn't want to relax just yet, since he got an interesting phone number from Piro. He also left a piece of paper with Mount Lady's agency number nearby, in case he ever needed it. He needed to look over his analyses before thinking of selling any of them. After all, if he gave them away, then they would become useless. The reason was simple really. He was aware whoever bought them would use them to kill the heroes the analyses are about, which would ultimately render them useless. Izuku wrote these so he would be able to fight anyone by developing his analytical skills. He looked at Jiren's contact information. He would also need a burner phone now that he thought about it, but this could wait. He tapped the number in, grumbling because of his big fingers and the size of the smartphone, before raising it to his ear and holding it with 2 fingers. The phone was ringing, which was a good start, but the man wasn't picking up immediately. He was either busy or simply didn't trust an unknown number. However, after several seconds, someone picked up. "Is this Jiren?" Izuku asked before the man on the other hand had the opportunity to talk. "Is asking?" A gruff voice replied in apprehension. He was careful, it seemed. "Someone who wants to do business. I've got something interesting I could sell," Izuku responded while Jiren, he presumed, hummed. "That, I expected. Who gave you my number?" he questioned. "Piro," Izuku simply answered. He could have given Piro's full name, but if Jiren was the real deal, then he should know the man's name. "Oh. Did you fight in the ring or did you bet?" Jiren asked, suddenly growing more trusting. "I fought, but I don't anymore. That's why I need money," the horned boy explained. "If Piro gave you my number, then you must have something worthwhile. Alright, I'll hear you out, but we shouldn't talk over the phone. Whatever you want to sell, bring it to me to the address I'll send you," Jiren stated as Izuku nodded along. "Will you be alone?" "Yeah. I hope there will be no surprises," he replied. His tone was light, but the threat hidden behind his tone would be hard to miss. "Don't worry. I'm a professional. I won't ruin a business relationship before it even started," the man on the other side of the line reassured him. "Alright, I'll hold you to that," Izuku responded as Jiren hung up. Only a few seconds later, the boy received the address through a text. It didn't specify when he should be going to that place, but he sure wasn't going there now. He was still in his middle school uniform and he wanted to have dinner, too. First, he changed into a better outfit which was all black and consisted of an open leather jacket with spikes on the shoulders, leaving his chest bare, and tight leather pants with boots. He also wore spiked bracelets. All in all, he didn't really have the look of a future student in heroics. After that, he looked up Mount Lady's agency, trying to find the most information possible on it. Of course, all of it was public knowledge, so its usefulness would be limited. It reminded him that he needed an information collector who would work under him. Izuku couldn't exactly sneak around with his massive body. The best way to actually gain some information would be to have an internship there once he entered UA, but he wouldn't do that. Someone like him deserved a pro hero in the top 10, at least. Right before dinner, he looked through some of his files again and picked 2 of them before transferring them to a USB key. It contained everything he managed to analyze on the hero's airjet and master driller. This should be a good start and Jiren would also see he was trustworthy. Inko didn't have any special reactions after he told her he had to go somewhere that evening. She didn't question him or anything and he didn't expect her to. All she did was tell him to be careful as he exited the house. He was always careful, but he had to admit everything was going faster now. It wasn't the first time he had done something illegal, but he was now ready to fully enter the underground world. Meeting Jiren was only the first step. Izuku glanced at his phone while looking around. He carefully followed Jiren's instructions to find where he was supposed to meet him, but he was still having difficulty finding the place. He expected it would be in a district similar to the one where the underground fight club was. Meaning, something poorly frequented and with little to no heroes. However, this looked like any regular street you would find in the center of Musatafu. It didn't look completely safe exactly, but it still didn't seem too bad. He guessed hiding in plain sight wasn't a bad option. If Jiren was only an information broker and helped get two groups or people in contact, then he would not need to be overly sneaky as he did nothing too suspicious. Nonetheless, people smart enough to hide in the light rather than in the shadows were often the most efficient monsters. Maybe Izuku did make a good decision by getting in contact with him. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and turned left. There, standing in front of him was what seemed to be a cabaret. He was hesitant to go in since he wasn't sure this was the place. After all, Jiren didn't send him a full address, only the name of the street. He only added in his text that they would talk about their deal over a drink. This cabaret was the only place where you could order a drink on the street, so he supposed he should go in and check. Putting his phone back in his pocket, he went in, pushing the door open while slightly leaning down so his head wouldn't hit the top of the doorframe. He immediately cocked an eyebrow in surprise once he was inside. Only a few people were sitting at the tables and with only light drinks. Sure, the cabaret's atmosphere was pleasant since it was peaceful, and the soft musical ambience did well to soothe someone's spirits. However, he expected the place would be louder and more vulgar, considering it was likely often the meeting place of various villains. It was no wonder no hero found this spot. No one would think they would find many criminals here. He had no idea what Jiren looked like, nor did he want to question every person about him here, since it wouldn't be discreet at all. Instead, he figured he should just buy a drink and the man would likely figure out he was the one he communicated with on the phone. The bartender, who was cleaning a glass, slightly widened his eyes as he looked up to Izuku's tall form approaching the counter. "What can I get you, big fella?" The bartender inquired once Izuku sat at the counter on a stool that could barely fit someone his size. "Give me a glass of sake," the horn boy ordered. He never had alcohol before, but he supposed there was a first time for everything. Since everyone always mistook him for an adult, he was aware he could buy a drink in any bar and no one would ever check his ID. It probably didn't matter in this place though, considering the activities happening there. He knew his mother often drank sake while he was at home or at school, so he always guessed it tasted good. Now was the perfect time to check. "Here you go," the bartender stated as he placed a glass of sake in front of the massive boy. "Thanks. Keep the change," Izuku replied before giving him a bill and immediately taking a sip of his drink after that. It slightly burned his throat, but it did nothing beyond that. He liked the taste, but he felt like he would need much more alcohol to get affected by it. When he expected it the least, the smell of cigarettes invaded his nostrils, making him glance to his left. A man stood there, leaning on the counter. He looked middle-aged and had gray hair with round glasses. With a missing tooth, the goatee, and the cigarette in his mouth, he looked like one hell of a sleazy bastard. "I'm guessing you're the one I had on the phone earlier?" The man, presumably Jiren, asked with a mischievous smile. "I am, and you must be Jiren. How did you know it was me?" Izuku responded, making the man grin with confidence. "I've never seen you here before, and I'm also a pretty good judge of character. I can just tell by looking at your face that you aren't here to play around," he explained before walking away. "Let's get a more comfortable seat. Take your drink with you," he suggested before walking toward a nearby table. The booth was a bit too tight for Izuku's liking, but he didn't complain. He was used to having his size being a drawback for possibly anything he did. "So, are you new in the field? I don't think I've ever heard of you before," Jiren started the conversation as he took a puff of his cigarette. "I've only been in underground fights, but apart from that, I haven't really done anything yet," Izuku replied, figuring he could tell him since it wasn't something that could be used against him. "I figured since you knew Piro. Do you mind me asking how you got into this life and your goal? It could help me find you what you want." "That depends. You want to work for me?" Izuku questioned with a raised eyebrow. Of course, he wouldn't just spit out his plans and goals to anyone, especially if they weren't even working under him. Jiren slightly widened his eyes in surprise, then laughed out loud. "You're a funny one. But I can tell you're not the type to tell many jokes." Jiren leaned back. "You said you wanted to do business. I need a new source of income, and I've heard from Piro you were an information broker." "Information is exactly what I have," Izuku explained, making the older man arch an eyebrow in interest. "Oh? What type of info? Blackmail material? On a pro hero or another villain? Information on a big score could be good, too," he listed excitedly. "How to kill a pro hero. Is that good enough for you?" Izuku suggested as Jiren paused in surprise. Suddenly, the older man's eyes gained a malicious glint. "Oh, you really aren't the joking type. You've come to the right place," Jiren muttered as he silently gestured around him. The horned boy didn't need to look around to feel the heavy aura of hate the customers around felt for pro heroes. That much murderous intent wouldn't have gone unnoticed by anyone. However, Izuku stayed impassive. He knew this intent wasn't directed at him. Even if it was, he had nothing to fear. He didn't fear anyone. "I've got some analytical skills some of your partners could find interesting," Izuku stated before taking a flash drive out of his pocket and putting it on the table. "It contains every information I could get on the quirks of 2 pro heroes. It has their strengths and weaknesses as well as the way to beat them," he explained. "I see. I don't doubt I can easily find a buyer for this," Jiren stated as he lifted the flash drive and looked it over. "How much can I expect for it?" the green-haired boy asked while the older man hummed. "It depends on the targets as well as how effective your info is. First, I need to check it out myself and make sure it's legit, then I'll find someone willing to buy it. You'll only get your money then, but for something like this, I think you'll get around 430,000 yen per pro hero. Only if your information is accurate, of course," Jiren explained. "I don't mind the wait. It's a fair price, too," Izuku admitted with a nod. Obviously, he would need to sell information on multiple heroes if he wanted to match his earnings from the fight club. This wouldn't be an issue since he could just sell information on multiple heroes per month. There was an abundance of them, too many in his opinion, so all he had to do was walk outside and he would find a fight between a pro hero and a villain, eventually. "I'm not just a buyer and reseller, by the way. I can get you in contact with other people. I'm sure a few groups could use your skills," Jiren explained before leaning forward. "There's this new group who'll make itself known soon if you want to," he began, only for the massive boy to sigh. "No thanks. I'm no one's lapdog," Izuku grumbled. There was no way he would belong to someone else. He wasn't the type to follow orders. He understood he would have to do it after joining UA, but he was willing to bear it because entering such a prestigious school would be beneficial. No villain group was interesting enough for him to bend the knee to someone. However, he wasn't against making a group of his own. "Still, I'm gonna need a crew. How much do I need to pay you to find someone willing to join me?" "Oh? So you want a group of your own, huh? I'll be frank, I usually don't make the people I like pay for this service. Finding someone looking for a group is the easy part. You and your comrades will have to do the rest," Jiren responded. "What do you mean?" Izuku arched an eyebrow in confusion. "You need people you can trust and who'll trust you back. The way you people work or how you motivate your followers, that's something you guys will need to figure out," the older man explained while pointing his cigarette at Izuku. "Yeah, I got it. Just find me someone and I'll do the rest," the young boy assured. His confidence seemed to be enough to gain Jiren's trust concerning his team-making skills. The closest thing he had to a crew were some of the worms that served as his classmates. Bullies often had their cronies, kids who followed them because they didn't want to be bullied or because they wanted to feel a glimpse of what power felt like. He wasn't exactly a bully, though. He had much better things to do than waste his time stealing lunch money from the common weaklings you find on the playground. He did intimidate some of the class bullies to get them under his control. Humans acted the same no matter their age, though. He knew fear alone would make the disposable ones loyal. The fear they'll have of him would prevent them from betraying him because they wouldn't think it was worth it if they lost their lives in the process. This was another story for the people who would become his officers. They needed to be loyal out of respect rather than fear. He could only hope Jiren had a good enough eye to find suitable villains that would make acceptable top officers. He suspected he would have to find most of them himself, though. He discussed with Jiren for a few more minutes before leaving the establishment. Of course, he left the flash drive with the information broker so he could sell the analyses. He had 10 months before UA's entrance exam, and that meant he had 10 months to build himself a good crew and a big source of income. There were other key details he couldn't ignore. He would mostly fight in close combat because of the nature of his quirk. He couldn't turn into a full dragon just anywhere, especially if he wanted to hide his identity. Even if his natural brute strength was formidable, it would benefit him to have a weapon to fight with. Of course, it wouldn't be a firearm, but it needed to fit his size, so something like that needed to be custom made for him. He doubted it would be cheap, but he had enough money for something like that. After saying goodbye to Jiren, he didn't stay outside for long since he had no more business. As usual, his mother greeted him without asking any questions and then went to sleep shortly after because of the medicine she took to lighten the pain in her leg. Since he gave her a portion of the money he earned, he wondered if she would use it to get a better prosthetic. She didn't spend a lot of money often, for some reason, probably because she wanted to be careful with it. Izuku didn't care what she did with it. It wasn't his responsibility, and helping her simply improved his own living situation since she was his mother. If she lived a good life, then he also lived a good life. Since he wasn't going to the fight club anymore, he had no reason to skip his classes. It was still boring, but no one bothered him. Bakugo hadn't even tried to challenge him. Instead, he only glared for a few seconds once in a while, then returned to his activities. Maybe he simply wanted to keep training until he was sure he could defeat the massive boy or perhaps get a better score in UA's entrance exam. Honestly, Izuku didn't care enough. Bakugo didn't interest him in any way. Sure, he had much more potential than the average middle schooler, but the green-haired boy didn't believe the blonde would ever be a challenge to him. Moreover, he couldn't recruit him either. It wasn't because Bakugo clearly revered heroes, since Izuku truly believed that no matter how much someone loved heroes, you could always turn that love into hate. Especially Bakugo's, the guy who only wanted to be the strongest. Izuku could respect that drive. However, someone like Itsuki would never work under someone. He already knew the blonde wouldn't respect his authority and would constantly argue with him. The dragon boy had no time to waste on these things. Maybe someday in the future, Izuku would give him the choice to join him. If he refused, well, that was a problem for another time. As expected, a few days later, interesting news shook the Pro Hero fanboys forums. Airjet and Master Driller had both been killed. It was also talked about in the news soon after. Izuku couldn't keep his smirk off his face. It wasn't that he held a grudge against them or anything. He wasn't happy about their death specifically. He was glad because this was no mere coincidence. It meant Jiren found a buyer, and that buyer disposed of these two pro heroes. He would get paid and do the same thing again. He still had folders of info on multiple heroes. So he used them. He regularly met up with Jiren and handed him 1 or 2 folders, which the older man sold, then gave him the money. The business was going well, however, the information broker couldn't find anyone who would work under him. It was mostly because he wasn't known yet, so villains were reluctant to be under the thumb of someone who they had no idea what they were capable of. This was a pain in the ass, but it was also understandable. He didn't expect this to be easy. He needed to build a reputation. A part of him also encouraged him to seek out gang bosses and outright challenge them to take over their crews. It could work, especially since he was confident in his abilities. However, he couldn't simply look out for any random gang. Taking over a group of 4 people would have been useless. Moreover, he needed to take over a gang that also ruled over a territory, which wasn't uncommon. The only issue was that it had to be a minor territory, otherwise, he would risk painting a large target on his back. He didn't want his name to get out before even entering UA. While Izuku was writing notes about his next possible strategies and plans right in the living room, his mother was putting on a vest. Inko limped around the room, looking for her keys as she avoided her son's hulking hunched form over the table. "You going somewhere?" Izuku asked, slightly curious. "At Mitsuki's. Do you want to come, too?" "Katsuki-kun will probably be there," Inko replied as she limped to the door. "We're not exactly friends," Izuku simply responded to Inko's surprise. "Really? But you've known each other for years. You are in the same class," she arched an eyebrow, stating the obvious, to which Izuku scoffed. "So? We don't walk the same path and he isn't worth befriending," he retorted while shaking his head. "That's a shame. I'm sure Mitsuki would have been happy if you had come. She hasn't seen you in a while," the woman argued, making Izuku roll his eyes. Mitsuki was Katsuki's mother and Inko's closest friend. She was like an aunt to him, which was why she always insisted he should call her auntie when he was a kid. He personally thought it was pointless since she wasn't his aunt and he didn't feel such a connection with her. In the end, she wasn't even close enough with Inko to know about how bad her relationship with Hisashi was. "She always asks me how you're doing when I have tea with her," she insisted. "Maybe I'll go there if I don't have anything more important to do," Izuku sighed in annoyance. "Happy, now?" he grumbled. Inko begrudgingly looked away, seemingly not completely satisfied. "I'll see you later," she said with a downcast look before going out. The long-haired boy rolled his eyes before looking at his notes again. Since he couldn't look for information himself, he had no other choice but to ask Jiren for it. Actually, there was another option, which was to check which gangs were the most notorious on the news, but this wouldn't really tell him which territory they controlled and which ones would allow him to stay in the shadows. He pulled out his second phone and texted the older man before standing up. He would also use this as an opportunity to receive the money from their previous transaction, since his analyses allowed the killing of one more pro hero. In a way, perhaps it was bound to happen. When you had a quirk like hers, nothing good would come in your life. Her parents were the first proof of that. The way they rejected her, she could never forget it. They reminded her every single day, after all. She was called crazy because of her quirk, something she couldn't control. She was called crazy because of her eyes and her expression. Was she supposed to forcefully change herself? If only they accepted her, maybe she wouldn't have resorted to these drastic measures to be happy, but they didn't. No one did. Every person she looked at was happy, smiling widely as if there was nothing wrong in their lives, and the moment they were in danger anyway, a grand hero would come and save them. How was it fair that only they got to smile without a care in the world? How was it fair that only they got to be saved by heroes? At some point, she simply understood that those heroes only saved those who belonged in society. The rest, crazy people like her, were to be thrown out like trash. This was the cold reality she learned when she was just a child. Her life was dark, cold, gray, it wasn't worth living. The only people close to her only wanted to fix her. She wasn't broken. She didn't need any fixing. If she needed to change who she was to fix herself to be loved by her family and have friends, then maybe those people didn't deserve to love her at all. The day that boy was hurt and she drank his blood put a definitive mark on her. This was how everyone in school would remember her. The crazy girl obsessed with blood. She couldn't count on her parents to help her, of course. In the end, the only thing that could help her was the sweet life juice every living creature had. She had quite a fascination with blood. In fact, she loved it. She felt like she could be herself every time someone's blood graced her lips. Her life gained colors and light. She was happy. So she figured she needed to chase after it to be happy for as long as she could. The first time she took someone's life had been special. It wasn't as bad as she thought it would be. She had no remorse. She craved more. So she became a sort of hunter. She hunted people who caught her eye and killed them. She wondered what her parents would say if they had seen her. Would they say how much they knew she wasn't normal? Would they attack her in fear? They probably forgot about her anyway. She had been missing for several months already. Ever since she drank the blood of that boy near the end of her last year in middle school, she had been on the run. She couldn't stand everyone's hate and she didn't want any more trouble. Instead, she lived as she pleased. However, it was hard when you lived alone on the streets. She had needed to throw away her middle school uniform. She replaced it with a safuku with a beige cardigan, a blue skirt, and black knee socks. She hoped most people would pay more attention to her clothes rather than her face. At least, they would think she was just an innocent girl for some time. Today, she was thirsty for blood again. Like many other times before, she sneaked through the random passerby with her eyes wandering around, checking out if she could find anyone whose blood would taste good enough. Everything was based on a hunch, but she usually had a gift when it came to finding people who would taste delicious. The issue here was also the fact that she needed to find someone alone and isolated from any possible witnesses. As if the heavens answered her prayers, someone passed her by, nearly knocking her over if she hadn't moved away at the last second. Other people weren't as lucky since many of them were pushed out of the way. However, none of them spoke up or insulted the one who pushed them. The blonde girl immediately understood why once she looked up. The one who nearly pushed her down was a massive man with black leather clothes, horns, and long wild green hair. He easily towered over everyone else. The girl had seen a few people with mutation quirks that made them big, but the ones with that size certainly weren't common. Someone like him must have had gallons of blood to spare. The rarity must have made it taste even better, too. She grinned widely and sinisterly, showing off her teeth as she imagined a way to take the giant down. This was too soon to claim victory since he was still in a busy street with many witnesses, but if she followed him long enough, then it was possible he would end up alone at some point. That would be the time to strike. She wasn't afraid of his size since she was a bit experienced thanks to her time on the streets and the various murders she committed. She discovered a talent for silent assassinations. Actually, she was sure that even an assassin wouldn't discover her presence. It may have been a bit arrogant of her, but she was confident in her abilities. She followed for at least half an hour until he finally took an advantageous turn for her. She wasn't sure what his destination was, but it didn't matter. The alley he went to should be empty. Before following, she waited for a few seconds until he was far enough so there wouldn't be anyone close enough to see or hear what would be happening. It wouldn't be the first time there was a witness, but she would rather avoid it. Any other villain would have been found out already. After all, she was only a few meters away from him, silently following him in the narrow and filthy alley. However, as expected, she had erased her presence completely. Her steps were so light she didn't make a sound. Her breath was so soft it wouldn't be heard even if they were in a small and quiet room. She slowly pulled her knife out of her cardigan's pocket, making sure her clothes didn't even rustle. His size was a problem, but nothing she couldn't overcome. Once she was finally close enough, the girl suddenly dashed forward and bent her knees, putting all her strength into her legs before jumping up. She used as much speed as she could muster and managed to use her other hand to grab one of his horns and avoid falling back down, then wrapped her legs around his neck. She quickly raised her knife in the air and immediately brought it back down to stab the man in the face. However, right before she could, a sudden killing intent made her body freeze in place. The blonde widened her eyes in fear as she glanced to her right and noticed a hand reaching for her head. Sensing danger, she jumped off the man's back and escaped his hand just in time. "Huh? How did you sneak up on me?" the man questioned, turning around to grab her again. With the agility of a cat, she jumped aside and used her silent technique again. This was even easier in this situation. Because of his size, the man had more blind spots than the average person. She disappeared, he muttered as he turned around, only for the girl to slide between his legs and get behind him again. Now. The blonde thought with a crazed grin, then thrust her knife into the back of his leg. She was going to make him collapse to his knees, then slit his throat. Unfortunately, her knife simply bounced off upon contact, much to her shock. "There you are." The horned man breathed out before turning around and outstretching his hand to catch her. The blonde girl jumped back, nearly falling to her butt, but caught herself. "Just stop moving, please. I want to see you bleed so badly." She laughed before launching herself forward. She decided to throw caution out the window and use speed instead. If she drove her knife into his chest before he could react, she would win. "Got ya!" she exclaimed with a loud giggle while he remained still as a statue. Finally, the tip of her blade reached his chest, only to sound like it hit a steel wall and bounced off like it did on his leg. The girl widened her eyes in shock as she fell on her back. After yelping in pain, she swiftly got back on her feet, her knife in hand. This wasn't going as expected, but no matter. It was more fun like this. It would make seeing his blood and drinking it even more worth it. She dashed toward him again, ready to dodge if he attacked her. Fortunately, he remained in place without moving an inch. Instead of jumping up this time, she stood on the ground and raised her arm high enough to reach his abs and slash across and left no marks. With a click of her tongue, she attempted multiple other slashes, which were all in vain, then thrust toward his belly. No matter what she did, her knife simply couldn't get through his skin. What was his quirk? "Are you done?" the horned man asked in boredom while she panted, trying to catch her breath after pathetically tiring herself out. Before the blonde could answer, he grabbed her arm and lifted her up to his level, making her yelp in pain and drop her knife as he squeezed her wrist. Trying to claw his fist open proved to be useless, unfortunately. "Now, tell me. How did you sneak up on me? What's your quirk?" "I'll tell you, but you let me stab you first." "Deal." She chuckled while struggling against his grip. "Oh? That's strange. I'm sure I remember letting you stab me a few times already," he tilted his head. "Your knife isn't going to pierce my skin anyway. No bladed weapon can." "You aren't the only one who tried," he explained as the girl finally met his eyes. She couldn't help but widen her own. This wasn't a civilian, that was for sure. Because when she stared into his viridian eyes, she saw death. Not her own, mind you. She saw eyes like her own. Eyes who had known death and welcomed it. She immediately knew this man had already stared into the eyes of people he killed before. This was a murderer like her. Nonetheless, it wasn't like the common villain who went on a rampage. She knew this because she wasn't like that. His killing must have been calculated. It must have been done for a reason. Then her eyes wandered all over his figure. He was massive, but it wasn't just his size. Everything about him screamed intimidation. This was why no one dared to call him out earlier. They were all scared of him because of his appearance. Was his childhood similar to hers? She wondered. He was an adult and looked several years older than her, so he must have suffered for this even longer than her. Maybe it was poetic justice that she would die to someone crazy. "It's a shame it can't," the blonde giggled. "Your eyes would have looked even cuter if they were covered in blood," she exclaimed, only for the man to arch an eyebrow. "Huh? What are you talking about?" he inquired, clearly baffled by her random statement. "I'm going to ask again. How did you sneak up on me?" he questioned, only for the blonde girl to shake her head stubbornly. "I could break your neck right now. Are you sure you want to keep quiet?" he asked as he grabbed her head with his other hand. "Alright, kill me. But first, let me stab you. Let me drink your blood," she declared with a grin, uncaring of the danger she faced. The horned man stared at her in silence for several seconds before suddenly laughing. "You're about to die and that's all you have to say? You're a crazy one, aren't you?" he laughed, letting go of her head to hold the bridge of his nose. His laughter soon turned into a chuckle before coming to a stop. "I've wasted enough time. You're lucky we're in broad daylight," he said before dropping her to the floor. "I'm sparing your life." "Don't waste it," the man added, then slowly walked away, leaving the girl alone with her knife a few meters away. She looked back at him in surprise, while the distance between them increased with every step. This was the first time she hadn't managed to stab someone and drink their blood. But she wasn't mad. She just made a great discovery. Someone with eyes like that, with such a body, could only have a wonderful blood. She couldn't simply let go of it. Emiko Toga yearned to see this seemingly invincible man covered in cuts and bruises. That's it for today guys, hope you enjoyed this. If you did then please make sure to leave a like, share and do check it out, author of this fanfic. Take care. Thanks for watching.